into me. There were about 11 different questions that were sent into me. And we're going to kind of break them down into smaller chunks. So these 5 questions are: what exactly does healthy look like? Number 2, how do we get to unhealth? How does unhealthiness happen? Number 3 is, how do I separate the good from the bad? And number 4 is, how do I move forward and reconcile with this guilt that I feel? And then lastly, 5, how do I relate to those I don't agree with and love everyone involved? So those are the 5 things that we are going to go over in our time here together. So I guess just beginning, it's already 7:05. Brief disclaimer about the focus on this is that as a biblical counselor, my focus is on biblical principles. As biblical principles, I received my certification with Association of Biblical Counselors, and they teach you to have a well-rounded understanding of the human experience, and then bringing a biblical paradigm and biblical principles to help people walk through the obstacles that they face in experiencing peace in their lives. And so that is what I do, and I have experienced just a lot more furthering of my education in studying other biblical counselors like Dr. Henry Cloud. I've read through a lot of his books, and then also Dr. Dan Allender, that has helped to shape what I'm going to be sharing with y'all this evening. And a little bit about my heart in this is that this is not an intention to bash any culture or any ministry or anything like that. The hope is that people will be able to name their experience and be able to process through some of the harder questions that they may have as they continue on their journey forward. And almost done with the introduction here. I'm just going to share a little bit about myself. Is that I personally was involved with the ministry that I'm discussing for over a decade, but after a lot of the different things that had come out, the horrible things that had happened, I personally needed an opportunity to step away and find a fresh perspective. It was hard to see things from the inside. Those who have been under very high control cultures and different things like that, it's very hard to see things the way that they really are while you're on the inside. But from the outside looking in, it became much clearer as to what I was really experiencing. And I'm kind of like reading also as I share a little bit here. Once we get through the introduction, I'll be able to be more off the cuff. You might be asking, James, like a lot of people have commented to me directly saying, like I felt like I knew you, that you were a really nice person, that you were a great person, and I really think that I was genuine. I was never intending to be manipulative or to be harsh or whatever, but I do recognize that I did behave in ways that in retrospect did not really honor the Lord. So with that being said, I did things out of sincerity, but missing the mark is still missing the mark. And I'd become consumed with the means of advancing the mission of God, and I'd forgot to live like I was with family in between. Is that you can be really great with doctrine and theory, but people become a means to an end. You feel the distance with people like that, but you have a hard time putting your finger exactly on what is it that I felt with this person that just felt so off. Like, why do they feel so distant? And it was actually through one of the tragedies initially with the ministry that I was in that you know, a lot of people were asking other staff members for consolation, to be consoled and comforted in the midst of it, but a lot of people weren't reaching out to me, and it had been brought up to my attention by many people that I'm becoming more distant, more just very militant in my views, and a lot of people would respect the intensity that I had for following Jesus, but relationally, I realized I was very dry, and that even if it doesn't appear to have a huge effect on people, I realized after being outside of ministry for so long that that type of thing really does affect people. It affects the way people interact with their families. It affects the way people deal with sin. It affects a lot of different things whenever people put so much of an emphasis on the mission itself as really, you know, the ultimate focus. So that was something I learned about myself as I stepped away. So that's a little bit about me and my experience. And I had stepped away from the ministry completely because of these things that I was seeing in my life that I needed healing from, and just things that I didn't agree with in the ministry. And so I ended up moving away and going through counseling, and wasn't even considering any form of ministry at all. But God, I believe, had other plans, and I felt like God was bringing me in to minister again. And so I pursued certification with Association of Biblical Counselors after receiving extensive counseling myself, and then started my own LLC, and now here we are. And I've just been putting out videos and continuing to grow and learn. And so this is just my way of really sharing the years of experience, what I've learned, how I've grown, and for those who are still trying to process what they've gone through with high control cultures, how to process what you went through, especially if it was within Chi Alpha Christian Fellowship, that it would help you to process those things and encourage you along your way. So with that, I'm not going to be able to go over everything in a ton of detail, so I would encourage anybody who is wanting to dive deeper into this topic. You can go to my website, havequietcourage.kit.com, and I also have a free resource there for those who are wanting to dive into healthy community. It's called the 20 Do's Life-Giving Community. You can download it for free, or you can throw in a couple dollars in there to help me as I pursue this as a career. So I appreciate it very much. So, number one, going to the first question. Thank you for your patience. Number one, what exactly does healthy look like? What does a healthy culture look like? And I have a definition here that I wrote down. It is a place, health is a place where we can lay out, sorry, I'm not used to doing lives like this. I'm used to like being able to edit myself like 30 times. So it's been a while since I've spoken live. Health is a place where we can lay out God's conditions for thriving, experience it, and encourage it in each other while respecting each other's autonomy. Say that one more time. Health is a place where we can lay out God's conditions for thriving. God has a specific set of conditions for thriving. It's not like a mold that we squeeze ourselves into. I'll go into this a little bit more. There is freedom for creative expression in the way that we walk with Jesus, as long as it conforms to his conditions of thriving. It's a place where we can lay out those conditions. We can actually live in it and experience it, not just talk about it or tell other people to do it. And we encourage each other in it while respecting each other's autonomy. It is not a place where people are being coerced, pressured, manipulated emotionally, or where people are leveraging relationship in order to get people to do certain things. So, I'm going to give a case study of this. First and foremost, this is God in the Garden of Eden, God, he creates boundaries. So what we're really talking about, these conditions are boundaries that God himself creates. God himself creates. We have him splitting the sea from the land, and then you have these two spaces. He separates the sky from the dry land, and then in these spaces that he creates, and he fills them with life. And so then he creates an ordered universe where everything has its place, where it belongs, and it can thrive. And then God places humanity, Adam, in this place where Adam can thrive. So God has created a certain set of boundaries, and then now he's inviting Adam into that place. He invites Adam into his ordered universe. There's a specific set of conditions, but is it a set of particular rules? No, if you create a garden has quite a bit of space, and then you place the plants in specific places so that they can flourish. But there are conditions in which they thrive. So we can understand what those conditions are, but then in order for someone to thrive, they cannot be chokeholded or whatever into and forced into those positions. They are things that people are invited into. That is what is healthy, is when people are invited into it. So that's number one. So we're defining health so that later when we're talking about unhealth and how things got sideways, what exactly went wrong. So Adam was given a lot of autonomy. He was given a lot of freedom. He said, try any of these trees. Just don't eat of that one tree, because according to what I understand to be thriving, that's unhealthy. This is healthy. So there were a lot of different trees he got to eat from. And then he was also given more responsibility, but he wasn't micromanaged. God said, hey, name the animals. And he didn't tell them if it was stupid or not. He gave him a lot of freedom in the way that he walked with God. But it was still under a specific set of conditions, which were deemed healthy and wise and good. But even when we fast forward to when Adam and Eve are now in the picture, that God, again, does not micromanage Adam and Eve whenever they're at the tree, but he gives them the freedom to be able to choose what they're going to do, whether they will listen to him or not listen to him. So what we're talking about, we're going to break it down, and not just in a story format, but we're going to get a little bit more concise. We're talking about boundaries. We are designed in a way that every single one of us are meant to be given the freedom to take responsibility over three things. Number one, we are all given the freedom to be responsible over our beliefs, first and foremost, our emotions, and then lastly, our behavior. God, you see in Eden, God gave humanity the freedom to experience all those things and to grow all the things. He gave them conditions in which they could thrive in those three areas, but then he gave them the autonomy and the freedom to make those decisions on their own. So that is the first thing that we see in this illustration. God does not tell them, right? God is not saying, hey, you have to believe this right now, and he does not pressure them, or he does not manipulate them emotionally, or leverage his relationship with them in order to make them believe a certain thing. He has actually invited them into something, and he freely allows them to choose to not live it according to his house rules as well, and that they could leave if they want to. Well, actually, it's more along the lines of, if you are going to try and run my house respectfully, I will ask you to go, and I will make you go, and you can live outside, So God doesn't force them, he invites them in, and when they try to run his house the way they want to, he has set his own boundaries as well and said, sorry, you can't live the way you want in my home. Thanks, Raj. You can't live the way that you want in my home, and so you can try to live your way on your own terms out there. See, we already see these boundaries set, and they're very firm. Each person is responsible for their own beliefs, their own emotions, and their own behavior. And you can already begin to see where unhealth begins to creep in here. Another thing I want to point out too is that emotions are really, really a really big deal. Emotions are a very big deal because they are the indicators that they help us to understand our own, the world around us, how we're experiencing it. And if we numb ourselves a lot of times, not to jump too quickly into unhealth, but a lot of the time in the church, we have removed the emotions' role and their benefit and gift that they are to us. And so, unfortunately, we avoid our emotions a lot of the time, and we do not allow them to take their place in the sanctifying process. So we might understand that we are responsible for our own beliefs, our emotions, and behavior, but we also have to understand the role of our emotions. That is also where healthy culture is. Should your feelings direct how you live? No. Your feelings are indicators of what's going on inside. So talking about emotions, that they are a tool, that they are something that God has given us in the process of sanctification. So my emotions can be indicators of my deepest held belief. So they help me, and not only do my emotions tell me of my deepest held belief, if someone is stepping into my God-given boundaries that I have set, that I am to be responsible for my own beliefs, emotions, and behavior. When someone begins to step into my property line and begin to tell me how to do those things, anger is a proper response. It is, again, indicating to you, hey, like you're unsafe, someone's trying to control you, someone's trying to manipulate you. And when you get angry, that's actually a normal response. That is a God-given response to help you protect, yourself. So, anyway, but going back to what healthy culture looks like, what I've gone over so far, is a healthy culture is a place where you yourself are responsible for your own boundaries, that you understand the place that your emotions have and you don't numb them and quiet them. And it is done through invitation, not through coercion, not through emotional manipulation, not through pressure of any kind, or using the Bible. A lot of the time people will use the Bible to pressure people into making certain decisions. Instead of, you can imagine each person as a house. Like a healthy view, the Bible says that we are to be a city on a hill, right? That cannot be easily hidden. Well, a city is made up of a bunch of houses, and houses have doors and windows. So when you step through that door, that you respect the owner of that house. At the same time, if we are a house, if we're going to be a city of like-minded people, there are going to be times when we have to let people in. But it's because they were invited in. It's not because we felt pressured or shamed or manipulated into making them allowing them into our home. This is actually where this is the last portion of the first question, which was what exactly does healthy look like, that someone had asked me to highlight spiritual abuse. And this is actually really where we begin to see kind of the influences of spiritual abuse, is where people use the Bible, they use their position and their authority and the family of God to coerce people and to try to pressure people into making specific decisions that they deem most worthy or best for people to make. And that's how they get people to try and, that is a form of spiritual abuse. So if someone's like, how do I identify spiritual abuse? Like, what's the difference between that and this? Spiritual abuse specifically is when people are using their position in the faith, whether it is a role of leadership or they're using the scriptures and things like that in order to coerce you and to manipulate you into doing what they want you to do against what you want to do willingly. So, but then, so if that's what healthy looks like, if healthy is a city on a hill, if a bunch of houses where people are invited in, and each of these individual homes are responsible for their own beliefs, emotions, and behavior, like that's what healthy looks like, and we understand the role of our emotions in this place, how do we get to a place of unhealthy? How does it, how exactly does this happen? And I'm sorry, but it's probably going to be pretty anticlimactic. I'm not going to be diving into a bunch of different people's backstories, so to speak. Like that's not my job as not a psychologist in that regard, and breaking down each of the different leadership that I've been under and why they believed what they believed. It's actually speaking much more generally of a general, I guess, understanding. So something that I've seen time and time again that begins to slowly erode and derail the ministry. And this is not a Chi Alpha thing. This is not just solely a Chi Alpha issue, but it was something that we see throughout the body of Christ, unfortunately. And it is a Pharisaical spirit that equates outward expression with inward godliness. So I'm going to say that again. It is a Pharisaical spirit that equates outward expression with inward godliness, but the actions are devoid of character. So you can tell, I don't know if you can hear there's a lightning storm going on outside. You can tell when someone's actions are pure and they are done out of the simplicity of love. And there are no strings attached. There's no type of, you can tell when someone is simply just trying to be present to love you. That is very different than someone who is solely focused on being mission-minded and in advancing the kingdom by getting more people through the door, by doing the right thing, praying the right way, reading the right scriptures, fasting enough, doing all the, what must I do in order to advance the kingdom of God? What actions do I need to take in order to fulfill the equation that will get people through that door and will make me look like a success? And we might not use those words, and our intentions might seem pure, but when we begin to focus way too much on the mission and the Great Commission, so to speak, and getting people through the door, then we stop living like family in the in-between. And when you stop living like family in the in-between, then people become objects. People become a means to an end. When the end is the advancement of the kingdom, meaning that more and more people are coming through the door, then the people themselves become objectified and they become a means to an end. And that is a lot of what I begin to see. A lot of kind of focusing on, we called ourselves a garden and not a factory, but yet when people did not speak a certain way, disciple a certain way, read certain books, share certain teachings, live with a specific set of time devoted, instead of asking, okay, what is the heart of God for me? And how is he asking me specifically to, love people around me in my own way, my unique way, but became much more focused on the particulars. And when you get too focused on the particulars, things just erode, because you create this inoculation where to any other type of like challenging of character, because we figured it out. We figured out how to systematize it and just kind of push people through. And whether we realize it or not, or want to admit it, that at least was my experience. And some may ask, like, when did that happen? When did it start to happen? I think that as far back as I can remember, there was a lot of fun. There was a lot of memories that were made, and I'll never forget the great things that I experienced while I was young and a student in Chi Alpha, and there were wonderful things that I experienced. But I can say that from the very beginning, that there was a very, very succinct and specific way that we were expected to disciple. And those who could do it that way and do it well were promoted. And those who were not part of the in circle because they didn't quite understand God's way. We didn't use those words, but that was the way that people were treated. People were treated as more spiritually mature when they could see Chi Alpha's discipleship method as superior to all others. So it was the method really that began to be celebrated more over time. And I think that's just something that happened over the years more and more. And I think that people who really celebrated the discipleship method of Chi Alpha, when they were put in more places of prominence and influence, that it began to affect the culture more broadly. The more people, there was a saying in Chi Alpha, many different ministries, people use different language, but one is, he who wins souls is wise. This is a verse from Scripture. So therefore, if someone is winning souls, they're more wise than you, they're more godly than you, and you don't have a right to challenge them. And that is the next level of the unhealth. The next level of the unhealth that began to set in was that character began to take more and more of a back seat. That less questions were asked about character when somebody was seen as a soul winner. And this was, many have heard the name Daniel. There were times when I would ask questions about his language and some of his methodology or his teachings. And it was, well, you can't challenge the fruit, was always what was the rebuttal. You can't challenge the fruit. You can't challenge how many people are like spending time with Jesus and reading their Bibles. You can't challenge all that stuff. And so therefore productivity and success, discipleship method, if it was successful, you couldn't question the discipler. And that really began to slowly over the years permeate through the culture. And so there was a real obsession kind of with the way that we've always done things. And when things were ever challenged, it wasn't really very much up to question a lot of the time. So what happens then is that character, it takes a backseat. And we spend more time preserving the culture, spending more time preserving the thing that works, and actually we ask less and less about our own character. And I think, honestly, that's just how it began to erode. I know it's not really the flashy, exciting, crazy answer I think that people might be wanting and looking for, but I think it should be really humbling, I think, for all of us who are trying to walk with Jesus, is that when we lose sight of the main thing, when we lose sight that it's about being conformed to his image, to his character, and loving people well, when we lose sight of that is that's really what it's about, ultimately. And that is how things slowly began to erode. Someone asked, how do we build trust again? How do we build trust again, James? Well, that's a really big question. And I guess first of all, I meant to say this at the very beginning, but I'm just so sorry for every single person who's suffered through feeling like that they had so much trust, so much confidence in the people that they were putting their really trusting their walks with God with, you know. I'm so sorry that many people felt like that they were taken advantage of, and many people were taken advantage of, not just spiritually but physically, and that did happen, and I'm sorry for that. So how do we begin to build trust again? How do things get better? I'm going to name two specific things, and I kind of going back to the first question a little bit, using, what is healthy? Well, I guess that's what and thank you for asking that question. The way that you build trust in new community is, well, first of all, I have 20 things that I've written in the 20 Do's to Life-Giving Community. So if people are wondering, what does Life-Giving Community look like? Where is a place where I can really begin to trust people and grow in my relationship with Jesus and make sure that I'm the type of person who's actually real with people and not being manipulative? 20 Do's to Life-Giving Community. These are just two of the 20 that I'm trying to summarize for a lot of things. These are two things that you can look for. One question that you can ask yourself in the new community that you find yourself in, or in the community that you find yourself in now, is my autonomy respected? Is my ability to determine my own beliefs, emotions, and behavior valued in this family, this Christian family? Is it respected? Or when I make a comment about something maybe that's theologically different than what the people around me feel, as long as it's not, one of the essentials like the deity of Christ or the Trinity or the resurrection of Jesus and being receiving forgiveness by faith, by grace through faith, things like that. If it's like, I'm having trouble believing once saved, always saved, or I'm having trouble believing, well, maybe, like I can lose my salvation, or I'm like working through these things, or I don't know if I totally agree with friendship evangelism. I have a conviction to preach on the streets, or maybe you just have something that maybe is, like just an opinion that you have. Like I said, God creates this space, these conditions for flourishing, and that people should be free to express themselves with a certain level of creativity and freedom in their walk with Jesus, as long as it doesn't contradict the heart of God. But if in that place you're communicating your beliefs and people kind of give you the side eye, or maybe they begin to treat you different, they begin to treat you less than, or they begin to kind of shame you in the way that you believe, and be like, are you sure? Like, are you really going to believe that? Like, come on. Or you're treated as second tier Christian because you won't let go of that one belief. Or you're not really welcomed in or treated as an equal. It might not be said explicitly, but they begin to treat you that way passively. Or people will begin to pressure their relationship and be like, I don't know if I can just be as close to you because of what you believe. Look, if we're like all walking close, trying to get closer to Jesus, if something that you believe is actually a more close interpretation of the scriptures, and we're all genuinely walking closer to Jesus, then we should have some confidence that people can figure it out on their own, and that God can speak to them. And if their door is open and asking for your input, then you can freely give it. But autonomy means that they're not going to be pushing the door down and rearranging your furniture whenever they get the chance. That's what autonomy looks like. Number 2 is, have they shown themselves to be a person who is trustworthy emotionally? Have they shown themselves to be a person who is trustworthy and emotionally mature? The question was, how do I build trust again? So one of the things I was saying, first of all, is make sure they respect your autonomy. And I detailed, what that looks like. But then secondly, is, are they emotionally mature? And are they trustworthy? Are they the type of person who runs their mouth whenever people share things with them? Are they the type of person who are quick to gossip and kind of talk behind people's backs about their problems as a way of kind of belittling them? Are they the type of person to be able to carry what other people's pains and burdens are well, and to not minimize or to just kind of brush off the things that people go through? When you see those two things in somebody, those are some good indicators that you found somebody that you can build relationship with. And it's okay if that takes time. I think that's pretty normal. When Adam and Eve are in the presence of God after sinning, they hid. Shame is powerful. It is a powerful weapon the enemy uses, and it is something that takes time to heal from. And it's okay to find people who are trustworthy, who respect your autonomy, and who are emotionally mature enough to be able to carry your story with you. You are not obligated to tell every single person, every single part of your story. We even see that in James. It says, go to the elders. Confess to a mature believer. It doesn't mean that every single church leader is mature, but it does mean that ideally they should be, and that that's the type of person that you should trust. So that concludes question number 2. We're going to move on to question number 3. Question number 3 is, how do I separate the good from the bad? So I'm just going to break these down. This one we're going to move through a little bit more quickly. 2 questions that we can ask ourselves and how to separate the good from the bad. Number 1, does this teaching or memory produce the character of Christ in me? Or does it pressure me towards production and Christian activity? Does it influence me to be part of the family of Christ and to love people well? Or towards production and Christian activity at the expense of family? Does it produce the character of God in me? That's the first thing you can ask yourself. Number 2, again, I keep on talking about autonomy a lot, but does this teaching or memory empower me towards autonomy? Or does it pressure me towards codependency? Like the teaching, like if you have received a lot of teaching under high control leadership, or under cultures and systems that are very high control and emotionally manipulative, you ask yourself, is this producing the character of Christ in me? Or is it asking me to simply just do things the way that they do them? And number 2, does it encourage me to make decisions for myself and to be able to be the type of person who can make those decisions for myself? Or is it pressuring me towards codependency? That is number 3. So we have 2 questions left. We're at number 4. How do I move forward and reconcile with the guilt I feel? And I really felt this one when I read that, because it's really easy to be so hard on ourselves when we feel like we've been part of a system or a culture that was toxic and that was hurting other people. And how could I do that? How could I believe this? Yada, yada. So participating in something that in hindsight you recognize is unhealthy can leave you with a lot of mixed emotions. It depends on your level of involvement and personal experience. If you were subject to physical, spiritual, or sexual abuse, understand that you were groomed to be the problem in this type of a culture. And it's in this type of a culture, not the other person is being highlighted. This is a much more sensitive topic that deserves more attention than I can give in a live stream like this. And I will say that if that is you, if you're the type of person who experienced that type of deep spiritual, sexual, or physical abuse, that I highly encourage to get help. You might be saying to yourself, like, no, that's not me. That's not me. Hey, please do yourself a favor and get yourself some help. It's more than I can do in a live stream like this. But I am available outside of this, and you contact me through my website. I have means to reach out to me. But if you were a part of a culture like this, Um, if it is more, instead of the physical and emotional and spiritual abuse, if it is more about being involved in a culture that pushed mission at the cost of family, big groups, small groups, or big, small groups, that's an oxymoron, and shallow relationships, pressure and relational coercion over influence, won through trust, then here's how you move forward. One, first step is to know your own heart. That is how we move forward. The first step is to know your own heart and to name your motive, to really be honest with yourself and to say, was I involved in this culture, in this system because I had pride? I know that I had to reconcile with a lot of pride in my own heart, is that I didn't speak out louder because I wanted a place to belong. I wanted a place where I could feel like I was loved and I had family. And there's nothing wrong with wanting that, but if we're not careful, that can become an idol by which we don't challenge the things that are obviously unhealthy in front of us. And we have to name that. Or if it's pride, that it just feels good to be a part of something big and the next thing that God is doing now. We got to be real with ourselves. And lastly, maybe it was naivety. Maybe it was because, I just believed what people were saying, and that this is really the will of God. And since they're the man of God or woman of God, I should just do what they say because, he who wins souls is wise. So I should probably just do it, right? And maybe they never, got you to do anything, and they were never intending to manipulate you, like sexually or physically or abuse you in any way, but to pressure people into this constant place of performance, and we are numbing ourselves to God's leadership in our lives, that really does mess us up. And we need to just be real with ourselves and be like, wow, I think maybe that's something that I went through. So either it was pride, we wanted to belong over having integrity, and then lastly, naivety based on family or culture of origin susceptibilities, things like that. And so how do we move forward then? Once we identify our story, we name it, then we speak God's story of our life. We speak God's perspective over our lives, and we choose to believe what God says. Sorry, I keep on rubbing my nose. My nose itches right now. But we choose to believe what God says about us. And then we choose His word over our internal opinions. And then lastly, we need to step into a community that will lovingly listen to our story and speak the truth over us, to speak God's perspective over our lives, to grieve with us, to mourn with us, to encourage us, and to be patient with us in that process, and to hold us accountable to say, hey, this is something you can do. This is how you can move forward. That is a great way. And so now we are at our last question. The last question, I'm actually going to have to read a little bit here for this one. I really want to do it justice. I don't want to misspeak on this one. Is that how do I relate to those I don't agree with and love everyone involved? So yeah, that's a really hard one. So I had to write this one out because I really wanted, this is in a 3-layered answer. So help me, be patient with me as I break this down. So number one, this is a multi-layered answer. This also may make some people very uncomfortable. So please hear me out before you grab your stones. The issue seen in Chi Alpha are systemic in the church at large, not just in the ministry that I was once a part of. Not respecting autonomy in family settings and numbing ourselves from mourning by denying our emotions. Like I mentioned before in the beginning, the difference is that not all ministries had a Daniel Savala. That being said, leaving one place for another does not equal a right or wrong decision all the time. There were people left in the land after the Babylonian exile who were given the opportunity to rebuild. God has the right and ability to keep people in Chi Alpha and the assemblies of God and the ability to tell others to leave for a myriad of reasons, and they can both be right. So, like I said at the beginning of this, like, I'm not in any way trying to bash like anybody who made any type of decision. We're trying to look at the general, the big picture here. Like, what exactly happened? How did things break down? And the reality is that this I think should be a lesson to all of us, as to how simple things can go wrong. That it doesn't take a lot to derail things if we get focused on the wrong things. And so for many people, they sense God was asking them to step away. And for some people, they may be believing that God asked them to stay. And I know many people are doing good work for the Lord in ministry, and they're very close friends of mine, and I respect them deeply. And they should be encouraged that God is doing great things through their lives, and I'm grateful for that. But then I myself didn't stay. You know, there is a place for a what is it? A Barnabas and Paul situation where Paul and Barnabas disagreed on how they should approach a certain situation with a person that they were in ministry with. And they both loved God, but they disagreed. And so they decided to go separate ways. And I believe that was something similar. I knew God was asking to say, hey, look, I think God needs me to leave for healing, for just perspective. I need to step away. And not everybody needs to do that. And some people need to do that. But that's the first part. Because there is still more to be said about this. The second thing, though, some people might be asking is, but where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line? I will say that there are people that I do not talk to anymore. And I wrote there are some people that I do not talk to anymore, not out of bitterness, but because I refuse to be manipulated and shamed back into something that is not true. I will not be pressured and coerced into believing that there is something wrong with me simply because I will not conform to a specific form of discipleship method and language. In my circumstance, I was praying for the sick. A lot of people were being healed, and I also had a very strong view on sexuality and on lust and how the Bible defined that. And people were very angry with me. And I was like, hey, like, I can't exactly pin you down and say, like, why what you believe is wrong. I don't agree with it, but somehow I respect you, and I'm still figuring this out, but I don't agree with you. But that wasn't okay. It wasn't okay that I believed at the time that everybody could be healed, even though I was seeing people get out of wheelchairs. It didn't matter that what I believed didn't fit their paradigm. And because of that, I was ostracized. And even before that I was still treated as an oddball and an oddity whenever I disagreed on certain things, and I was talked about like I was kind of off, you know? And I will not, if someone cannot apologize to you, if someone treated you, if you were simply trying to be obedient to God and listen to exactly what He was telling you to do to the best of your ability, hey, maybe you're a bit naive and you needed to grow in the process of it, but if they treated you like garbage and they treated you like trash, and they belittled you and talked bad about you behind your back, and they don't have the capacity to apologize for that and to admit how that was unhealthy and how that maybe even in some ways that you were right in your own beliefs, and that they need to learn to respect the way other people believe that might not always coincide with their convictions. If they don't have the capacity to do that, it does take common understanding to have fellowship. And I'm not going to sit under, I'm speaking a little boldly here, Joseph, in the same way, did not put himself in the hands of his brothers who had sold him off into slavery and treated him like cattle until he saw that their hearts were really changed. You can forgive somebody, but you do not have to reconcile with every single person. And so that is a principle that I've stood on, that people, I've forgiven them, but I am not obligated to reconcile in that relationship if I see that it's an unsafe, unhealthy relationship that is going to inevitably try to manipulate me and maneuver in a way to be in the place of authority over me again until I believe their way. I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to go there, and I'm not going to bring my family into that. And I would encourage you to stand in your own autonomy and who you are as a child of God, and to be with people that can respect you and not talk down to you. So that is where I draw the line in the regard of like who, it might be wise and unwise to be with if they can't reconcile with the past as being unhealthy, and they still think it's just spiritual warfare. They probably need a psych evaluation, maybe. And lastly, number 3, well, part of this question is, how do we love the perpetrators, people who sinned against others? How do we love people that either were spiritually abusive, physically abusive, or sexually abusive? How do we love those people? Anybody who has participated in those types of activities, just as God allowed Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, he did not micromanage them, and he did not try to control them, but he let them make their decision. And in that decision, they were trying to run God's house on their terms. And he said, well, you can live on your terms out there. God consistently allows the consequences to our choices be instructive. If someone has participated in nefarious behavior and will not openly repent of that or seek counseling, biblically speaking, they need to reap what they sow. And it's a hard thing to say. Paul even says, to hand them over to Satan so that at least their soul might be saved. People who will not come to terms with that need to experience. And so you can love somebody by desiring their repentance, but it doesn't mean that you need to show them unbridled compassion and kindness. Daniel Savala is in prison for most likely the rest of his life for a reason. And other people who have been behaving in ways that have manipulated people need to experience the consequences of their decisions, not just as a vindictive, you get yours, but more on a lighter note. Like, as a father, I know that my children will never learn. It doesn't matter how much I teach them. It doesn't matter how much I tell them I love them. It doesn't matter how much I tell them, what the Bible says. Until they reap what they sow, they're not truly going to understand the consequence, the weight of their decisions. And so one way of actually loving the perpetrators is allowing them to experience the weight of their decisions if they're not going to have solid evidence for change in their life. Like, even, this is something I've been thinking, this is kind of like raw off the cuff here, but I've even been thinking a lot about this, people who have been involved in this type of thing. I think, if someone is healed, supernaturally healed, they go to the doctor to make sure that their body is like, it's a verified healing. Well, if someone's going to be involved in something that can warp your mind to such a degree in the decisions that they made and how they manipulated and hurt people, if they're claiming to be better now, then get a psych eval. by a professional. And if they say that you're clean, praise God. But if you don't want to do that, then why should I believe that the healing is thorough? So, but I think loving people in that regard is holding them accountable and allowing them to reap what they've sown. But if it's more on the line of people who maybe were heavy-handed or got caught up in the system and the culture and couldn't see outside of that, maybe just giving some space, honoring them, loving them the best you can, just giving them some space. That's what I've done with some people, and I've seen people really grow. I've had the opportunity to grow and heal, and if the Lord prompts you, you can reach back out to them. But lastly, the survivors. Loving the survivors is probably the most easiest. Loving the survivors is the easiest because you just listen. Well, it's hard in its own way because of the weight of hearing through their stories and sorting through that. Loving survivors is to listen, be present, grieve with them, patiently and slowly remind them of who they are in Christ and of its justice. Keeping an eternal mindset is key. It's understanding that God can bring reconciliation and healing to a lot of people, but ultimately, I was actually in the courtroom when I saw Daniel sentenced to 30 years in prison as a 70-year-old, meaning he's going to get out when he's 90. But when I left that courtroom, I became very aware that that eternity is really the only hope that we have for real justice and reconciliation and peace. So if you've been hurt, you've been taken advantage of, walk with the Lord, walk through it. But I also want that even when we see what we feel like is justice, it still doesn't feel like it's enough. Not because it just doesn't clean the wound. We need Jesus to do that. But then ultimately, the only real healing, the full healing is going to come when we're in his presence. And he wipes every tear away and every bad thing becomes untrue. And so that's really our hope is Christ. So that concludes the 5 questions that I had. What is unhealthy? What is healthy? What is unhealthy? How to separate the good from the bad? How to move past shame? And how to relate to those that I don't agree with. I was going to open this up to Q&A. It ended up being an hour long. Also, because there were some technical difficulties, didn't realize that Instagram couldn't host this. That's a bummer. So not as many people got to join, but I'm going to post this up later, and I'm not even going to trim this. I'm just going to do it in its full entirety. So if anybody has any questions now, it's in the chat. It says that there's 3 people watching right now. Feel free to share. If not, I'll just close it out. But to those who did come, who made their way to Facebook to watch this, hey, thank you. Thank you for stopping by. Be encouraged. And till next time.